Well, let's talk to Joseph Moreno, who's former federal prosecutor at the US Department of Justice. Good to have you on the programme. This is really extraordinary, once again, looking at the second time this year that Mr. Trump is being charged with a crime. Give us your take on how this will play out today in Florida.
Well, you're right. It does, even though we've had now 3 days to absorb this, it's still extraordinary to have a former president and current candidate to possibly be a future president facing federal charges. It's a bit different than what happened in New York a few months ago, because I think even many of Trump's critics felt that those charges were old, and there were some legal questions that many people, I think, did take them quite seriously. These federal charges, on the other hand, are very serious. They are recent. There are no questions about the core facts. We know Donald Trump had these documents in Florida. We know he had many months to turn them back in voluntarily. And we know ultimately it took a raid by the FBI to recover them. So the reality is that he's facing some real potential consequences here. And I think rather than give speeches and make sort of boasts about how the Justice Department is illegitimate, he should really focus on his defense.
But we know what he will do. He will make those speeches, and he will say, which he said again and again, that this is a witch hunt, that he's completely innocent, that this is the establishment trying to remove him from politics. But if we look at the actual case that this one presents to him in Florida, it's about national security files, as you said, that were not handed back to the authorities. And is that the difference here between his situation and that of President Joe Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence, who also were found to have national security files in their homes?
Well, I think if you separate those cases, I think you could almost classify them as perhaps carelessness, which is still could be illegal. But I think once they were discovered, the individuals in those cases were completely cooperative. They didn't fight with the FBI. They said, come to my home, look around, take whatever you think is appropriate, and go. So it's more of a negligence kind of standard there. You could criminalize that, but I think in cases like that, most prosecutors would give them a pass because of how cooperative they were. Donald Trump, on the other hand, had many months in negotiations with the National Archives to give these documents back. Then he was faced with a subpoena, which is compulsory. And at that point, rather than give them all back to the government, he basically submitted a sworn statement saying, I've given you everything. The government obviously felt otherwise. And then a few months later, they found over 100 more documents when they raided his compound. So it's a combination of...
Sorry to interrupt you, because we're almost out of time, but I just want to ask you very briefly for your view about if this does go to trial, he's before a jury, 12 local citizens. How will the politics play a part in that, do you think?
Well, I mean, it only takes one juror to hang the jury, which basically means you cannot convict unless you have all 12. So the government will have to be either very confident in its charges that it will get a fair shake by any 12 people down in Florida, or else there's the real possibility this could go on for a long time, because if you got a hung jury, the government gets to then retry and start all over again, or it could give up at that point.
All right. Joseph Moreno, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Former federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice.